Hello, everyone. I just posted on the electric vehicles subreddit a recap of a trip I just took from Portland up to Anchorage, Alaska in a new Kia EV9. A lot of folks seem to find it helpful, but a lot of people also commented that they didn't have time to read it all. They couldn't read. They didn't have an attention span. They didn't know what words meant. Things of that nature. So I figured it would be fun to record the audio version, and that way also I can include some pictures from the trip and some more info about the route and stuff like that. So hopefully this helps. I've got it broken up into kind of chunks here. So at the beginning, just an intro and then a quick summary and then an even quicker summary. If you're really short on time, I'll divide up the YouTube video into chapters, and then some information about the vehicle itself and just kind of the logistics of the trip up top. So if you're really just here for the vehicle review part of it, you can dip out early. And then I've got kind of a day by day travel log thing that not only talks about charging, but about some of the stuff I saw along the way and just about the route in general and about my time. So if that's the type of thing that interests you, you can keep listening and watching and see some pictures from my trip. Otherwise, do whatever you want, live your life. Okay, so intro and background. So when I was planning this trip, I did a lot of poking around on Reddit and a bunch of other forums and stuff. I found that write-ups like this of the whole trip were really helpful to me. So for people Googling in the future, or for you if you're thinking about this trip, hopefully something of this kind of like length and detail will be helpful. And if not, I'm sorry. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska. I've still got family there. A family member recently wanted to buy an EV, and I don't really know that much about EVs, but apparently there was an incident somewhat recently with shipping where there was like a fire on a container ship, maybe, or something. So as a result, they're either not shipping to Anchorage or they're really expensive or something, but it sounds like the shipping up there was going to be a problem. So I needed a break from work anyway. I've been thinking about making this drive again. I've done it twice in my 20s, coming to and from Alaska. I really loved it. It's very different up there, and it's nice to see sights. So I agreed to drive it up from. They bought it in Vancouver, Washington, basically Portland, to Anchorage through Canada. We looked at taking the ferry for part of the way. You can take the ferry from like Bellingham up to Haines, Alaska, and then just drive the last chunk. But that is fun. They don't sail very often. I think they only sail once a week. And so that made the timing a little awkward in terms of like getting a ticket and getting a berth. I've done it in the past with a car. It is really fun to just drive your car on and then camp out on the deck. A lot of people do that. But you kind of got to be in the mindset of I'm excited to sleep on the deck of a boat for 3 days. When I was younger, it was definitely, it's like a party up there. You meet people from all over. It's really fun. But these days, I don't think my lower back would be too happy with that. So decided to go the all land route. And then, yeah, just I'll break it down into sections from here and should have the video marked in chapters. We'll see. And again, like I really liked having the detail when I was doing this research for my own trip, so it's going to get a little nitpicky, which plenty of you already complained about. So that's the story, the summary. So it's 6 driving days, is what it ended up being. Originally, I was thinking it would be 3 or 4, but it's 2,500 miles. I drove, the shortest day was probably 5 hours. The longest day was probably 10 or 11. The longest time that I had to charge the car was 4 to 5 hours in one sitting. And this was up in Whitehorse, I think, where the fast chargers, quote unquote, were broken. So it was just like I think they call it a level 2 charger. Typically, I would charge up above 80%. I think 80% is kind of the etiquette of when you're supposed to vacate a charger, but especially the further north you go, the distances just get more unpredictable, and it made more sense to charge up as far as I could reasonably charge up, 95, 100 even a couple days. I never got stranded, but there was a couple dicey spots, which we'll talk about later on the route planning thing. But overall, I was pleasantly surprised, looking into this trip before I left. And when I was up there, especially in BC, the charger infrastructure build out has been crazy. It seems like every small town has at least a fast charger, and then even some of the just kind of gas stations or wide spots in the road where you wouldn't expect, they've got them out there too. So nice work. And overall, I don't think there's any real regrets or big things I'd change. Even shorter summary: fun drive, a little stressful sometimes, worth it, long, beautiful. So about the car, I drove the 2026 Kia EV9. I think they've only been out for a pretty short amount of time, maybe a month or two, if that's possible. It was like the first, batch was the one my family member got something of. I don't know. I think, although I don't know, I think it was the long range all wheel drive model. I know there's a couple different like trim levels. It's not my car. I'm not an EV guy. I drive a Subaru in my real life. So I don't know too much about kind of those aspects. I know that I used a CCS charger adapter at almost every stop. I think the other type is like Chatamo or something. That's the one I saw all over the place. I didn't have an adapter for that, so I had to use the CCS adapter. I really like the Kia. It's really big for me. I am just one guy, but for this family, it feels like it's going to be a great size. There's like 3 rows of seats. It's all-wheel drive. It seems pretty bomber. So I think it makes sense. I don't know if the range is correlated with the size at all. Maybe that is how they do EVs too. But it's got quite a bit of range. I think like 300 miles, and it's really only up. I mean, honestly, really in Alaska where you feel it, where like you have to charge in Canada, and then it's like almost 300 miles to get to the next charger in Alaska. That was the only kind of dicey leg. It's got these driving assist features that I really liked, like lane keeping, steering assist, stuff like that. Really good cruise control. So between all those things, in places where the roads were good and the lane lines were super visible, you could basically just set all those things up and the car would more or less drive itself. I don't know if you're allowed to say that, but it didn't really take a lot of input from me to keep that thing going. The one downside I eventually noticed, which I'll talk about later too, is that the climate control, especially the AC, but even just it feels like turning the fan on at all, cuts into the mileage pretty significantly. This became an issue, like, again, for that long last leg that I was talking about. I basically couldn't run the AC. And it took me a little bit to figure out how much of a hit this put on the car. I'm sure this is more common knowledge for you EV folks, but it took me a minute to notice that, so just a heads up on that. And then just minor nitpicky stuff. The charging port is on the opposite side of the car for a lot of other EVs, especially Teslas, I think. So when you're charging at like banks of chargers, or some of the chargers up in BC, like, were oriented in a way where they kind of expected you to pull in the other way. So not the end of the world, a little tricky sometimes. And then some of the controls on the inside I didn't love. Like, there's no play pause button on the steering wheel, which I'm used to having on my car. And a lot of the controls are on the screen. There's more buttons than I expected, which is great, honestly. I think the big iPads in cars are insane. But the screen is also big enough that, especially when you want to like press pause on your media, because no play pause on the steering wheel, you kind of like brace your hand, or at least I did, like brace a pinky on the surface right below the screen. I'll see if I can find a picture to show this. But that surface is also like buttons that don't look like buttons, but they are buttons. So if you lean on it wrong, it'll like flip you back to another menu, which is kind of a pain in the ass. But those are little things. I think other than that, like, everything was great. There's a ton of like, seat heater, seat cooler, steering wheel heater, all the bells and whistles. I don't know if that's standard or what, but cool car. So the route, I took I-5 north through Seattle, and then I cut east at Bellingham to cross over more like by Abbotsford than Vancouver proper, because I knew I was heading up a little more east, and I was showing up right at rush hour. I didn't want to go through Vancouver. And then from there, just in order, the major places I went through, so if you want to pull up a map, is I went through Kamloops, Cache Creek, Prince George, Fort Nelson. I skipped over Dawson City. I cut that little corner. I think they call it Hudson's Hope shortcut or something. I don't know. Went to Watson Lake, then Whitehorse, then Beaver Creek, and then crossed back into Alaska. Went to Tok, down to Glen Allen, and then in Anchorage. Obviously, I stopped to charge more often than that, but those are like the main turning points on the map if you want to follow along. And the way I chose this was a combination of factors. It was some of things I wanted to see, or I knew I wanted to see, like towns I wanted to hit. Charging places that I knew existed based on some research. Also, forest fires, always an issue in BC. There was a couple that I looked like I wanted to avoid. And then since it was my first time driving an EV up this far and I hadn't seen travel logs of people who had really done it, I wanted to kind of stay within some kind of range of services. So I tried to stick to sort of more populous areas, although the further north you get, you don't really have a choice. But just in case there was a problem, I wanted to stay within, you know, hitchhiking distance of something. And I'll get it more into that in kind of the day by day. Lodging. So I stayed in a hotel, quote unquote, every night. If I was to do this again and I had a little bit more flexibility or I was driving back down, I think I would bring my camping stuff and stay at RV parks and campsites just because that lets you, I think RV parks, a lot of them are starting to put in chargers that you can charge the car overnight. I'm sure there's some, again, I don't know this, but like I know that RVs have to get plugged in, so I assume that at least can give you some juice. But because I was only going one way, I couldn't really bring my camping stuff because I wasn't going to be able to bring it back on a plane. So, I mean, I guess I could, you know, it just would have been a pain to get it back. And again, like, I don't have the best lower back these days, so camping is sometimes hit or miss. But I think you could definitely, if you're going to do it, you could definitely save some dough, and it would help you space the route out a little bit more if you brought camping stuff, and or at least were fine with staying at, you know, RV sites, or you put a roof tent on this thing. I'm sure would be great. All those kind of things would give you more flexibility for sure. The pain with staying in hotels is that because of the charging, there is a lot of charging infrastructure in BC and Yukon, and it's pretty well spread out, but there's not a lot of redundancy. So if there was ever a day where I showed up and the one charger in town was taken and I had to wait an extra hour, or like it was running slower than expected, or, you know, it was broken for some reason, then I would have had to kind of adjust my plans on the fly, because really the charging was taking quite a bit of time per day when you got to the slower chargers, like 50 kilowatts. So all that to say, it was hard to book hotel rooms ahead of time and know that I would actually make it to that town. So I was just kind of doing the day of thing, like pulling in, calling some places, and just walking in and asking if they had rooms, honestly. Sometimes that was cheaper because, you know, if you roll in at 9 p.m., they know they're not going to sell that room. But, you know, if you come in at like 5 and there's one room left in town, then it's going to be kind of expensive. Okay. And then cost. So in the post, I hadn't really crunched these numbers yet, but overall, for 6 nights, including charging, food, snacks, coffee, basically everything I spent money on the trip, for one person, it was about $1,700 US. Again, that's hotel room every night, so camping would make this a lot cheaper, even though a lot of the hotels were pretty cheap. And I like to try restaurants when I go places, so if you are making your own food, you could definitely save some money there. I mean, definitely not all the restaurants were worth me trying, so you're welcome. I took that hit for you. And then of that $1,700, about $225 was charging. I think I said $300 in the post. That was an estimate. It was actually even less than that. So every charger in Yukon was free, and I don't know how long that's going to be true for, but that $225 was charging in Seattle, and then a bunch in BC where it was cheap, but you still had to pay for it. And then once you got to the Yukon, it was free. And then once in Alaska, I'm pretty sure it's way cheaper than gas because of all the Canadian subsidies. So take advantage of those while you can. Sounds like the new guy is not as stoked about that stuff than Trudeau was. Resources for the trip. I used a bunch of different things, but mostly I used a Better Route Planner, which I'm sure all you guys know about. I think it's like an open source plug mapping thing. It was pretty good. The downside of this was I couldn't link my Kia up to it. I think you can do a Better Route Planner like Plus that allows you to actually link your car so that it knows your real driving data. So all a Better Route Planner data that I was getting was just based on the baseline Kia stats, which were all optimistic and not based on real world driving. So there was a couple times where I would like put the travel into a Better Route Planner just to like back check it and see how close it was. And one day specifically I'm thinking of, I showed up into town with like 6% battery left. It was kind of a little harrowing, but I back checked it in the hotel that night. I put the route into a Better Route Planner, and it was like, yeah, you should have arrived in town with 25%. I was like, oh, that's not the same at all. So definitely use caution, especially when you're kind of pushing margins like this in some of these more far away places. But overall, it was a good tool. I actually just started using once I was in BC, the only chargers really are BC Hydro. There's some Tesla stuff in the south part of BC, the more populated part. But once you get north, it's really mostly just going to be BC Hydro. That's what's at all the visitor centers, and that's like the government funded thing. So I just started using their app. And then Flow is the company in the Yukon. So I just started using their app. I don't know if that's better or worse than a better route planner, but it felt easier for some reason. And then the other big thing for this was I started stopping in at every little visitor center. I think that's not as much of a thing in America for some reason, or it's like old person coded to like stop at the visitor center, but it was super helpful. Like they knew the road conditions coming up. They even knew like about new chargers going in often way before some of these open source mapping things. So like I stopped at one place and they were like, oh yeah, they've got the new charger at Johnson's Crossing now. And I think that there's this RV park that they put in some fast chargers that, you know, you Google it and it doesn't show up anywhere. And so they're just kind of across what's happening regionally. I don't know. I think, you know, I'm sure Canada funds that stuff a little bit better than America does, or maybe I'm just not familiar. But definitely always worth stopping. Usually they have free coffee too. So, and you know, most of the chargers are at the visitor centers, so you got to park the car for an hour anyway, and you might as well go in and poke around. The other really great thing I got was the Milepost. It's a magazine, I guess you would call it. Well, like some kind of, you know, route guide. They have a website. I got a physical copy because there's a lot of this trip where you just won't have cell service. And basically every time I would stop at a charger, if I had 10 or 15 minutes, the Milepost lists like every possible point of interest and even a lot of like points of not interesting along the route. So they'll list like culverts and gravel turnouts, but they also list like, here's a trailhead, here's a like 5-minute hike to go see some amazing views, here's like blah blah blah, here's what this town is known for, like all this stuff. They also have pretty good EV charging information in there now. They update it every year, but I guess the rollout has been so kind of aggressive there lately that they were even a little bit behind for the 2025 edition. But I would still recommend getting it because it showed me quite a few like scenic things that I maybe wouldn't have stopped at for otherwise. Those are kind of the nuts and bolts. This is the more of the daily outlines. So this is where you can peel off and I won't be offended, or you can, you know, turn it down and gradually fall asleep as I'm talking. Day one. So this is Portland to Kamloops. I started off pretty early in Portland and just drove straight north through Seattle. I used to live in Seattle. The traffic there sucks. I don't miss it. To stop at a Tesla supercharger. It was on the map as being east of the highway up in Northgate, but I went over there and all I saw were regular chargers. I didn't know the difference visually yet, so I tried to plug one in. It didn't work with the Kia. I had to like download the Tesla app. Kind of annoying. Those chargers weren't showing up. Eventually I figured out my mistake. So the superchargers are across on the west side of the highway in this little office parking lot. This is my first time ever charging any kind of EV, so it took some kind of figuring out, monkeying around, but I got a couple adapters for the CCS to whatever the plug is for the Kia. You need some kind of adapter. Don't know what it's called. Sorry. Downloaded the Tesla app, like I said, and then from there it was pretty straightforward. Charged there for about 30 minutes, I think, to get back up to about 80%. So these first couple of days in city centers, I was just kind of charging to 80 and driving to 20, just that type of vibe. In the meantime, I needed to use the bathroom. There's an office building there, but the bathroom's code locked. So pro tip, you can just do the kind of thing where you hear someone in the bathroom, you walk away 10 feet and then time your like walk up to the bathroom perfectly, so you can just kind of catch the door and give them the nod and go in like you work there. Worked great. Then up north, turn right around Bellingham into kind of farm country so I could cross the border more near Abbotsford. Border crossing was really easy. The Canadian guys are always really nice in my experience. There's some questions just about, you know, the car was just purchased, it had temp plates, but overall it was totally fine. And then crossing into Canada, another note on the car, the Kia didn't automatically switch its displays to kilometers. It has on the heads-up display like a speed limit sign that's like, this is the speed limit in the area you're in. I don't know how they pull that data, but it was pretty accurate. So that doesn't change to kilometers, even though the physical signs in the real world are in kilometers. Your speedometer doesn't change to kilometers, and your like route, what am I trying to say? Like remaining charge, also all that stuff stays in miles. But the Kia does do the conversion. So like if you're in a 100 kilometer zone, it will be like speed limit 62 miles an hour, which I think is the conversion. Assume that there's a way to change all that stuff to kilometers. In retrospect, it might have been worth it because all the like distance signs on the road are like, 400 Ks to Watson Lake. So you had to do some math, but it's a long drive. You might as well multiply some fractions to pass the time. Stopped in Chilliwack for the first stop to charge. I think it was this place called like On the Go. It was in the parking lot of a gas station. This is a pretty typical setup for a while. A note here, the chip technology in Canada is like 20 years ahead of the United States. So definitely stop in, get some chips because they have these bonkers flavors that are, for the most part, all really good that you just can't get here. There was like, after I finished charging here and turned the car back on, it gave like an alert, like a red exclamation point in the car silhouette. And I looked that up and it said, electrical system alert, which that's not something you want to hear, but I turned the car off, turned it back on again, and it went away. So who knows? Not really my problem anymore. That happened a couple times on the trip. I assume it's just some kind of residue from the, various electronic things talking to each other. Not sure. It didn't seem to affect any kind of driving on the car, but it was a little bit alarming. And then towards the end of day one, 5 or 6 p.m., I was looking for a place to stay, so I headed for Kamloops. It was a town I was interested in checking out. It was also the biggest city on the route, probably, until Whitehorse, so I assumed it would have at least one hotel with a room. Little did I know. I didn't know what the deal was with that town, but you pull in and there's just hotels everywhere. Boom, boom, boom. All the way along your whole way into town is hotels. I found out later, someone commented on my post on the subreddit that it's the quote-unquote tournament capital of Canada. Not totally sure what that means still, but I guess if you play a sport in Canada, good chances are you're going to end up in Kamloops at some point for a tournament. So there's a ton of hotels, which explained a lot. So I got a room at the Doubletree in town. It was perfectly nice. Great room, a little spendy because it was the last minute, but that's okay. They have a couple charging spots, but they were both taken by the time I got there, so I didn't get to charge the car overnight. Yeah, nice place. As I pulled in and was checking in, like this squad of like Gen Z boys was coming down the elevator ready for a night on the town, and I was like, what is going on? Is this like a bachelor party place? Like, what is the deal with this town? But they're probably just on some kind of sports team, so hope you boys did well. I just went to bed. Day 2, Kamloops to Williams Lake and then to Prince George. So got up pretty early and had breakfast. I went to a place called Hello Toast, I think it's called. Sat at the bar. It was super busy. Eventually got a pretty good sun-dried tomato and Asiago Benedict. It was fine. Maybe should have just stuck with the standard. But the breakfast potatoes were incredible there, so definitely get those. Then kind of walked back through town, poked around. It's got, it's a nice historic-ish by by North American standards downtown. Some cool old buildings. I'm getting into film photography a little bit as like a hobby, not as a personality, don't worry, but took some pics. Passed through the farmers market, which was going on, which was kind of fun, and then drove over across one of the rivers to charge up the car before heading north. The city's kind of built on these 3 chunks that are all split up by the rivers, kind of these bluffs. It really reminds me of like Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington, just like dry, goldeny brown bluffs, like rivers, some green, but just kind of a lot of like gold and brown and orange and stuff. Really beautiful. My plan coming into this trip was like, I'll, I got to park the car and charge, so I'll just use that time to see these cool little towns and like walk around downtown and look at some nature and take some pictures. But the way that actually the charges are laid out is they put them in like the ass end of some of the weirdest little parking lots in the province. So instead of being in the middle of the historic downtown, you are behind a Tim Hortons or something like that. So not quite as cool, but whatever. So at this stop, I got this horrible drink at Tim Hortons. That was on me. We don't have them here. I wasn't used to the amount of sugar they put in those things. Had a sip, threw it away, wandered around. There was some like First Nations interpretive installations, which were pretty cool to read about. And then it was a bank of Tesla superchargers that I was charging at, so I got to listen in on all the Tesla drivers and their Tesla driver problems and complaints and arguments and stuff like that. So could have been worse. On the way to town, I stopped at for coffee at Log Jam. Not quite on the way out of town. Had to double back a little bit, but amazing little coffee shop. Favorite one of the trip. Great vibes. The coffee was great. It was super slammed, but nice people working. Chatted with them a little bit. The coffee came in kind of a weird shaped cup that didn't really fit in a cup holder that well. It was very short, but whatever. It's all part of the vibes. So I got this a little bit out of order on my initial post, so I'm recording a pickup here. But the next stop after this is Williams Lake. I mixed things up a bit initially, but this is just another little. It's the halfway point between Kamloops and Prince George. Another little town with a nice kind of historic downtown with some nice indigenous interpretation sites and a cool visitor center, and then the charger up in this weird strip mall area. I think it was called like Prosperity Ridge or something. Extremely bleak, just a bunch of like box stores and chains. I got lunch at a place called Noodles California, which actually was not too bad, but basically just sat in a parking lot for an hour while the car charged up and then headed north again. So I'm going to note, at this point I was hoping to push a little bit past Prince George that day, but there's no real logical next town. It's Prince George is kind of the fork between 37, or the Cassiar, which is on the west, and 97, which is more on the east. And on both of those, there wasn't really like a place that made sense just to tack on like another 3 hours of driving. Like I said, it's a little bit hard to split up the trip if you need to stay, like the combination of wanting to stay in a hotel, wanting charging infrastructure, and like wanting to drive a reasonable distance. You kind of have to pick two of the three, like that old saying. But it was fine. I mean, it just ended up, the days became kind of uneven, which, added some texture. So whatever. The next stop was Prince George, and this was only like 3 hours away. So again, short day. I got a room at the Hyatt Place. Again, there's a couple EV chargers in the front, but they were busy when I got there. And then later at night when I checked, I think they were Teslas again. For some reason, like the plug fit the car, but I couldn't get any charging going and they didn't take cards. They must have been Tesla chargers. I don't remember exactly, but so I couldn't charge the car there overnight. Kind of unfortunate, but whatever. Prince George, I had quite an evening here. I'd never been here before, but I went to this place called the Twisted Cork. It was a little quiet initially. This guy Mike was bartending. He was a total character, maybe too much of a character. We did a shot together. He was like making me all these drinks. I had the scallops and the risotto, which were both good. The Caesar salad was this cool like deconstructed Caesar, very fun. Eventually another solo traveler kind of pulled up at the bar. We had another like 3 or 4 drinks. She was like, let's go to the casino and play some blackjack. I was like, sure, let's do it. So we went to the casino. I guess that's her like main haunt when she's in town. She's traveling for business. She was really good at blackjack. I was really bad at it. She won maybe $20. I instantly lost all the money I brought to play with, but whatever. It was a fun night. Day 3, Prince George to Fort Nelson. This was a long haul day, so I decided to go up 97 instead of the Cassiar 37 for a couple reasons. There was some fires on 37 that I didn't really like the looks of, that looked like they might be burning across the highway. 37 is also more remote, more spread out. It's more beautiful, I think, because of that, but I was a little bit gun-shy still about being so far from towns and services. I never got a flat, but one of the things about this car, I think, is like, there's no spare, for starters. I couldn't convince my family member to buy a full-size spare. So, and then like the way you repair it involves like goop and I don't know. It's a very strange setup. So I just didn't want to be that far from a town if something happened, and the road gets really rough. So I thought that a flat tire was pretty likely. So anyway, all that to say, I took 97 because it was a little bit more populated, which not really saying much. So this day, day 3, really long day. I think maybe 10 or 11 hours of driving. I was nice and hungover because I had too many glasses of rosé at the casino. But got some eggs at the hotel. I went and found a BC Hydro supercharger on the edge of town. It's like in a community college parking lot, middle of nowhere. And then on the way north, I stopped at this little cafe called the Open Door Cafe. I believe it was called. Totally fine. I think there's one of these in every single small town on this continent. Just like, like live, laugh, love, gray vinyl flooring, bright. That, you get it. But this place had a lot of local arts and crafts, which was cool. Like some, cards, earrings, candles, stuff like that. The first haul of this day was Prince George to a place called Chetwynd, which is a small little town. I guess it's famous for its chainsaw carving competition. I got lunch at an A&W here. A&W in Canada, much better than in the United States. And charged up at the visitor center right up the street, BC Hydro. It's a beautiful place. You're kind of following this like valley along this leg. Lots of farms, forests, great terrain change, kind of this rolling hills that roll into the valley. And then you'll come around corners and there'll be really sweeping views. I don't know, really beautiful. And then I think it's called like the Hudson's Hope Cutoff. I basically cut off a corner that you would go into Dawson City to meet up with the Alaska Highway. This only really saved me a little bit of time. If you are interested in sightseeing and you're taking more time, I would probably recommend just going to Dawson. I probably should have, to be honest, but it was a long day. But Dawson City is like the official start of the highway, so I'm sure there's more stuff to do, maybe a better place to get lunch than A&W, signs to read, stuff like that. But this, whatever this cutoff is called, really beautiful scenery as well. I think there's a big actual BC Hydro project, like a dam project back there that they were working on. There's this place where you're like right down by the river and you like swing up this hill really quick and all of a sudden you've got these great views. Anyway, really scenic. And then at the end of this cutoff, turn left onto the Alaska Highway. Burr, 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 finally. And this is what you're on for the rest of the way to Alaska. That's why they call it that. Next stop is a BC Hydro charger near Wanawan, which is not a town really. It's just kind of a gas station and a motel and then like a work camp for all the mining or natural gas stuff that's going on around here. I'm not sure what it was. As I was pulling in here, some other people were charging in this like teal Chevy Volt or Bolt. I don't know what it's called, but a small little Chevy thing. Decal on the side that said Bolt to the Arctic Circle. I Googled this a little bit, but nothing really was coming up. But someone in the subreddit commented like, hey, are these the guys? And they were. I think it's called like Quig's Quest or something. It's a guy that's trying to drive his Bolt to the Arctic Circle, like the decal says. Anyway, what's up, guys? This little stretch here along the Alaska Highway is pretty funny. It's scenic, but in a different way. It's definitely starting to feel like more like a place I grew up, Anchorage, in that it's built on a bog. You can tell that there's like permafrost down there and like tree roots can't get very deep because the trees all kind of stop at a pretty specific height, which is pretty low. Things are like muddy, boggy, definitely buggy. Some really great thunderstorms are ripping across here towards the end of the day. Not really in the mountains yet. That's a little bit later. And most of what you see along here is just kind of like motels or just abandoned motels. I was thinking about like there's so many abandoned motels on this trip. And I guess it's just like, if you're running a motel and you die, who takes it over? Probably nobody. It just sits there and kind of molders. There's a ton of just kind of, boarded up motels along the way. There's also I think there must be a lot of natural gas stuff happening along here because there's a lot of guys in, with sunburns all over in giant pickups, like kind of pulling into the gas station, throwing a 24 rack of kokanee in the back of the truck, and then with all their welding gear and like pulling out again and, going to weld stuff or get drunk in their work camp or whatever. Interesting vibes if you're into that kind of stuff. I was looking forward to, I had looked up a few hotels at one of these stops. I had my eye on this hotel at Fort Nelson that was supposedly had like an abandoned tiki lounge in it, which sounded really interesting to look at, kind of like fun and creepy. So I looked it up on Priceline and booked a room. I don't recommend doing that. That was a mistake. But I pulled in and like the hotel was like dark, no lights on, looked like it had been abandoned for 40 years, like no cars parked anywhere nearby. So I parked out front. The first set of doors was unlocked. Second set was locked, but someone heard me like try the second set, and they like appeared from behind its dark desk, came up to the door, and she was like, "Hey, do you have a reservation?" I was like, "I mean, yeah, but what's going on here? Like, do you guys still exist, basically?" She was like, "Yeah, we're just closed tomorrow, so you can check in, you can stay here, but we'll be closed tomorrow." And I was like, "Okay, what does it mean to like wake up in a hotel that's closed? Like, what, am I gonna be the only guy in the hotel? Am I gonna have to like, you know, let myself out and lock the door behind me? Like, what are you talking about?" But so I was like, I think I'll just grab another room. I went back up the road a little bit. This place called the Woodlands Inn and Suites. A huge place, actually. A lot of kids, which I know because they put me in a room right off the lobby, right next to the bathroom on the main floor, but it's all good. It all worked out. Walked up to Boston Pizza, which is a nice classic Canadian chain. Had a very questionable chicken Caesar salad. Yeah, not questionable, but definitely not good. Not bad. Whatever, you get it. It was fine. There were no EV plugs at this hotel, but there is still a BC Hydro fast charger in town because we're still in BC. Day 4, Fort Nelson to Watson Lake. Woke up early again, eager to hit the road. This day is probably the highlight in terms of the scenery, driving into the Canadian Rockies, so it gets really scenic. Charged up the car to BC Hydro fast charger. I got some McDonald's breakfast. They had something called a long espresso on the menu, which I'd never heard of in America. And so I just got out of curiosity. They served me this like tiny, cute little to-go espresso cup that if you gave it to any American McDonald's customer at any American McDonald's, they would like unholster their gun and start blasting. It's like so small. Next stop was a place called Toad River Lodge. That's another one of these like, dozens of like funny little gas station motel combos that are kind of in the middle of nowhere. Pretty decent coffee. The BC Hydro charger was still a 150 kilowatt here, so still pretty zippy. This was the only one on the trip, I think, where there was no cell service. So instead of that being a problem, which I was worried for initially, they just set the charger to like free mode, so it was free. So great. I just kind of like wandered around here while it was charging. Supposedly there's some kind of like hat, like Alaska Highway hat display. They have postcards showing it, like hundreds of hats, I think up on a ceiling, but I kind of wandered around the place and I didn't see a room where it would be. So I don't know where that is, or maybe it doesn't exist, or maybe it was somewhere else around there. It looks like a nice little place to stay. I mean, there's like cabins on a lake, scenic, so could be an option. I kept it pushing. And this is, when we get into the Canadian Rockies, the scenery is pretty dramatic. I was stopping every 10 minutes to take pictures of mountains and stuff like that. I'm by myself. I can do whatever I want. One of the highlights here is you pass by Muncho Lake, which is this amazing like teal green color. It's a pretty long lake too, so definitely, pull over, gaze, take it in. So the next stop was, I think, the highlight of the whole trip for me. A place called Liard Hot Springs. This is another reason I took 97, was because this place existed and I saw pictures of it. But it's this like day use area. You walk down a boardwalk through the woods for like 10 minutes through this kind of like hot springs fed swamp that's like really warm and weird. And then you get to this really cool structure at the end with like changing rooms and benches that like dive down into this water. Really beautiful, really cool, kind of different zones of areas, but then like a natural hot springs. Pretty stinky place, but really great to just kind of sit and soak for a while. And it was like a lot of people were there kind of congregating from the area. I think I saw the Quigs guys again. At least I'm pretty sure, because he was like, it looked like him. He was like walking down into the hot springs with this like giant GoPro rig, like kind of filming, which I'm like, I don't know about filming in hot springs, man, but I guess whatever. And then the other funny thing here was in Chetwynd at the A&W, these like Quebecois like motorcycle dudes came in when I was eating lunch there, and they smelled so fucking bad. I started laughing because just like the stink, you hear their awful Canadian accents, and then just like the stink rolls over you, and it's not their fault, they're on motorcycles, whatever, but it was just like, oh my god, this is brutal. So saw them here too. Great that they were taking a dip and sluicing off a little bit. Very funny, but definitely you got to stop here, it's amazing. And then the stop for that night was this place called Watson Lake. At this point I was kind of thinking like every town further north, I pull into the town and I'm like, damn, this place is really fucking tiny. And then like the next day, the next town I would stop at is like, oh, that last place was a metropolis. And so this was like, this is even tinier. It's very small. It's like a wide spot in the highway. Officially in the Yukon at this point of the trip. So the chargers are all this company called Flow, and they call them fast chargers, but they're only 50 kilowatts or 50 kilowatt hours. I don't know exactly what those terminologies mean, but 50K we'll call it. Versus like the BC Hydros that were like 150K. So they were still fine, but in order to charge up, like I said, I was trying to charge above 80% just because of the distances involved. And that was like a, multi-hour thing. So basically, as soon as I pulled into town with one of these, that was kind of where I was going to be stopping. The good thing is they're all free because the government pays for them. The charger here is at the Visitor Center, which is across the highway from this really amazing place called the Signpost Forest. I think one of the guys who was building the highway around World War II stuck up a sign that was like, 3,000 miles to my hometown in Illinois or whatever. And then that tradition kind of stuck where people would start posting signs up of who they were and where they came from and like when they were coming through. And that's been going since the 40s, so 80 years at this point. And it's really crazy to walk around there and just read signs from people who took this trip 30, 40, 50, even sometimes 60 years ago. Just like think about who these people were, where they are now, if they are, and just it was like I really recommend taking some time. And also I didn't have a sign with me because I kind of forgot this place existed, but so I wrote a little note on the back of another sign with a Sharpie. I saw a couple of people doing that, so hopefully that's cool. But next time I'll bring a real sign and put something up. It's like a real cool tradition. In town, I got a room in a place called A Nicer Motel. There's like a little strip of motels all in a row. They all look pretty much the same to me. This was a place with availability. The other ones were full. It was, plenty fine. Nice little room. The plumbing worked. They did have a kitchenette, so if you're cooking and stuff, that could be a good option. And then at this point I was also reading a lot of like Google reviews for the places I was stopping, which I would always look for the newest ones and then the worst ones, because like people just have these insane expectations of what to expect in this part of the world. And I just I was cool with all of it. Like it was all part of the adventure, but definitely I think some people's expectations were a little bit high for where they were. I got dinner at a place called The Nugget. There might have been another word in there, the something nugget, but I think it was The Nugget. It's like a Chinese place, but like, the kind you would get in the 90s, which I have not had since then. I'm sure still exists. Maybe it's more of an East Coast thing, but like this reminded me so much of the like American Chinese food that I would get growing up in Anchorage. It was pretty good. I mean, it was like vegetables, which was great to have vegetables. And this is also when in the trip it started hitting me like how similar Alaska and like this part of Canada were. Like despite being totally different countries, they're both just kind of these like weird little places where everything got built during like one resource boom or another, and it's just kind of like everything gets built in like a 5-year period and then degrades until the next resource boom. And just like for Anchorage, everything was built in the 70s and it's been kind of going downhill since then. And like a lot of these places kind of felt similar. Like you could tell it was just all kind of, based on that cycle. It was very, I started feeling very like nostalgic, I guess, for my hometown of Anchorage. Not nostalgic, whatever, you get it. Okay, day 5. This is Watson Lake to Whitehorse. So this is where every night at the hotel I would, like I was talking about, I would stop and kind of do some research on the next road coming up because I knew I was going to lose service. So I would kind of, I had this travel planning document where I would put in like the next destination, where I was thinking about charging, any points of interest along the way, just so I would have that in a document when I lost service. And this is where I kind of noticed that a better route planner distance guidelines were not matching what I was getting in the real world. Like I was saying, they were often way optimistic. And at this point in the trip, I was still cranking the AC because it's really muggy up there and still pretty warm. So I noticed, like, oh, are we really going to be able to make it? Like, unfortunately, the very last leg of the trip, basically, is pretty much at the max range of this vehicle. So I knew I would have to charge 100% at the last charger in Canada in order to make it to this next charger in Alaska. And it was like, whatever, 250 miles or something. I don't remember the exact distances, but I remember they were at, kind of the range of the car. And working backwards and looking at what I had actually been getting with the AC on, unbeknownst to me, I was like, oh, I am not going to make it. Like, that is outside the range that the car is telling me it can get and that I'm getting based on my experience. So I was like, oh shit, like, what do I do? So today, day 5, is the day that I wrote down a bunch of distances, wrote down the distance per Google that I was actually driving from point to point, wrote down what the car thought I would make when I was starting, wrote down the actual when I got there, and then did all this kind of arithmetic to see where I was at. And pretty clearly noticed quickly that it was the AC that was driving this. So after that, it was a little bit less of a worry, but that was kind of today's activity, was to do a bunch of math with pen and paper. So in Watson Lake, still, I topped off again at the visitor center because it was pretty slow and I wanted to park the car by the hotel without it being fully charged. So drove up to the visitor center, topped it off again, poked around the signpost for some more, and then I hit the road. First stop today was a place called Rancheria Falls. There's no charger here, but there's a quick little 10-minute walk along they built this nice series of boardwalks to go see an overlook of a couple cool waterfalls. I'm a little spoiled living in Oregon, but these are really nice if you're not from a place with waterfalls. Met a couple here who was on their way from Edmonton to visit their son in Whitehorse. I took their picture. I don't think I saw them again, but what's up, guys? Hope your son's doing well. So the math at this particular point, the car was optimistic by about 25% when I kind of did the pen and paper math. So not as bad as I thought, but short distance, so bad to extrapolate for data, and it was still pretty worrying in terms of my overall range. So the next leg from Rancheria Falls, I totally cut the AC. And it really helped. Unfortunately for me, that was a really big difference maker. So a lot of the rest of the trip, I was not using the AC. Originally today, I was thinking there was a leg on this trip. There's a charger in a place called Johnson's Crossing that is about the distance from where I started in Watson Lake of that leg in Alaska that I was worried about. So I was like, well, if I can make it from Watson Lake to Johnson's Crossing in one go, that's about the same distance as it is from Beaver Creek to Glen Ellen in Alaska. And if I can make that today, I have backup plans along the way. I have the redundancy to check this out where I won't on the way to Alaska. So if I can make it, it'll be fine. But I knew the charger in Johnson Creek was 25Ks max, which is again half of the 50, which is already a third of the BC fast chargers. So as I was kind of going on and doing my paper math at every time I stopped the car, I started to get less worried because with the AC off, I was actually beating the estimates. I was actually doing better than the car thought I should be doing. So I didn't really want to stop at Johnson Creek and have to charge there or Johnson Crossing, have to charge there for a really long time. So I ended up just stopping in a place called Teslin, which had a fast charger, fast in quotes, a 50 kilowatt charger at the marina. Left the car charging, crossed over the highway, had a pretty good sandwich at the restaurant there. Restaurant was really busy. So it's some kind of hub for folks. It looked like maybe some fishing tours and stuff were going out of there. Left Teslin at about 80%. So charged for, an hour and change to get back up to 80. And then the next stop was Whitehorse, which is actually a pretty big town in the area. So I aimed first for the fast charger at the Transportation Museum on the outskirts of town, kind of near the airport. At this point, again, it was in that weird zone where it's 4 p.m., still a lot of light left in the day because it stays light really late there. But, I'm on 30% charge. If I can top up quick, maybe I go to the next place. But since I have to charge at 100% in Beaver Creek anyway, is it really worth it? So again, that kind of not even distribution of driving time thing. I was also, this is day 5, and that was kind of the max that I thought it would take. So I'm already like over my estimate of the trip length, and kind of feeling like I'd like to get home. So anyway, pulled into Whitehorse. The fast charger at the transportation museum was not working. So first time that's happened to me, but it pulled up. It was totally offline. So I went into Whitehorse proper to try and find another one, and then at the visitor center, I was pulling in, and a guy was like getting into his EV at the next stall over. He kind of like motioned at me, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he was like, "Oh, the chargers are down. Did you know that?" And I was like, "Oh no." He's like, "Yeah, every fast charger in town is down. Like I live here, and something's going on. Something's going on." Like he had his theories, like these kids and their graffiti like ruined our charger. I don't know, but I guess they were taking a while to get fixed because it's the busy construction season there, which that part of it makes sense. I don't know about his other theories, but there was also a ton of like I think again the level 2 chargers that are like 7 kilowatts that I think are more designed to just charge overnight. There was a ton of those available. They're still free because Yukon was paying for them. So I was like, well, I guess I'm not making it further tonight. I just hooked up to one of those slow ones and just planned to spend the night in Whitehorse, which I'm glad I did. This town kind of broke that every little town is tinier than the last one. This place really reminded me of Anchorage, just like architecturally, vibes wise. They have this beautiful riverfront path, which is really nice. It also seems to be a town that's full of like people who are about to go do some kind of outdoor activity in one way or another. Like I'm sure in the winter it's skiing. There's like mountain biking. Saw a ton of kayaks. I saw like hunters. Just seemed like it was kind of a base camp for local adventures. Kind of reminded me of Bend, Oregon. I got a room at a hotel called the Sternwheeler. I called around. This is one of the days where I called around to like 5 or 6 hotels. Nobody had rooms. The Sternwheeler had a room. It was more than I wanted to spend, but whatever. Um, and then I kind of parked the car back at the visitor center to charge, walked along the waterfront path. I put my name in at this place called Gather, which is, I think it's in like some kind of lighting manufacturing studio or some kind of art studio. It like occupies part of really cool space. It's like a little Mexican place. I had to wait for a table because it was popping. It was really bumping in Whitehorse on I think this was a Tuesday. So I went across that street to a hotel bar and had a drink there. Had some tempura green beans that were like totally fine. And then went back to Gather. Had this like ahi guacamole situation in kind of like a stack. It was an interesting little dip. Had a totally fine margarita. Then I went up to Woodcutter's Blanket, which is a bar up the road. Had a few more drinks. Talked to some interesting people at the bar. This couple from Alberta that was on their first road trip in like 40 years. They had been loggers or something. They worked in logging maybe. Yeah, they were from like a place in Alberta even further north than this, but just kind of not mountainous, not remote at all. It was really interesting to talk to them for a little bit. And then younger dude who just got laid off from like a fuel cell company. He was working on fuel cells in cars or something, and he was kind of, do I still want to be in this industry? What like taking some time to think about stuff, and decided to take like a head clearing road trip, which, good for him. Good luck to that dude. Yeah, I always recommend sitting at the bar and talking to strangers. It's great. At this point in the evening, the car was like just reaching 90%, and this is 5 hours later, so definitely was not going to make it any further that night. So I went back to the hotel, conked out. Day 6. This is Whitehorse to Beaver Creek, second to last day. This is another short-ish day because of the timing of the charging, so I was just going to take it easy today, give myself plenty of time to stop and look at stuff. This is another leg that is like maybe the most scenic leg, maybe the second most, but incredible scenery on this trip, like super dramatic mountains, etc. I got breakfast at this place called the Open Door in Whitehorse. It was slammed. They had this they had like a real streamlined operation there. They had like this whole like self-serve coffee station. They were just like cranking people through there, and it was busy, busy, busy. Yeah, Whitehorse, really interesting place. I really want to go back and spend a little bit more time there. It feels like it'd be a fun place to like, spend a week or something and just kind of meet some people and hang out. So the first little leg from Whitehorse was to Haines Junction. This was a spot that I had thought about pushing onto the night before if I had charged up faster, but that didn't happen, and I think I'm kind of glad it did because Haines Junction is pretty tiny. But they have a really great visitor center there. I pulled up, and for the first time on the trip, there was someone else at the charger that I had to wait for. That had never happened before, so getting a little bit busier, and then I was waiting in line, and another couple pulled up in a Tesla, so popular spot. I think it's definitely a crossing point from, Haines Junction, it's in the name. The couple in the Tesla, it was funny, like, we were chatting, and they said they had just been in Whitehorse, and I was like, oh yeah, like, all the fast chargers were down, and they were like, what are you talking about? I was like, yeah, I was just there yesterday, and, like, every fast charger in town was not working, or was charging really slow, like, I had to use one of the level 2 chargers, and they were like, no, we were just there yesterday, and, like, they were all working. I was like, okay, like, I was just there. They weren't working. I don't know what to do with this information now or this conversation. So I was just like, oh, yeah, that's crazy. And just kind of kept it pushing. The visitor center here is sweet. There's tons of info. This is a real mountainous area. They have a ton of info on like the geology, the history, the First Nations people. They have this cool 3D model of all the mountains in the area and like the ice fields and stuff like that. Pretty big visitor center too. I overheard like a First Nations guy from the eastern side of Canada. He was talking to one of the guys who worked there, who was also like a younger First Nations guy from the Yukon, and they were just like comparing notes on like how their different tribes like set things up or handled things, or like these different treaties and things like that. Kind of like nuts and bolts type stuff that was very interesting to eavesdrop on for a white boy like me. Cool little moment. I'm sure, representative of some extremely dark history, but it was interesting to hear those two guys talk to each other. So charged up to 80% here, left the charger for the Tesla people. I went and grabbed a coffee and a snack at the little bakery in town. I don't remember what it's called, but I think it's the only one in town. It's really cute, great patio, tons of dogs, people like sitting on the patio in the sunshine. I should have stopped and had like a real lunch here and hung out for a little bit, but again, a little bit hungover from tying one on in Whitehorse the night before, so I just kind of wanted to keep going. This segment from Haines Junction is definitely the most bonkers of the whole drive. Like the scenery here is insane. The road gets pretty bad around Destruction Bay, good name for it. But since I had made a point of stopping and talking to all the visitor center people along the way, like every one of them in the Yukon had told me like, oh yeah, I hear the roads are pretty bad at Destruction Bay, or like, yep, the roads are going to be pretty bad in that stretch, so build in some extra time, plan to go slow. And sure enough, I think it's built on permafrost, and when they first built it, they actually stripped off too much of the topsoil, so the permafrost melts and thaws. When they built later sections of the highway, I think they kind of learned their lesson and built in some insulation, like left a lot of the organic material on top of there so the permafrost stayed frozen. But in this chunk, it heaves like crazy because of the melt thaw and stuff, so there's just like a ton of these crazy dips that you really need to be prepared to slow down for. There was one that I like hit the brakes at the last minute because I didn't see it coming up, and I thought for sure I was gonna wreck the car. But yeah, just take it slow. I mean, it's beautiful anyway. It's a good place to do that. Got into Beaver Creek around 5 p.m. I hit the charger at the visitor center. This is like a slow charger. I think it was a 25 kilowatt, maybe not even that fast to be honest. Again, pull in at 5 p.m., you know there's going to be like another 8 hours of daylight because it's summer in Alaska, or it's summer in the north. So kind of frustrating to have that slow charger there because otherwise I could have, at least gone on to Toke or something. This is the leg I was talking about where this is the last spot to stop the charge in Canada, and I really needed to leave this town at like 100% in order to be comfortable to make it to Glen Allen. I think now that I knew that the AC sucked up so much juice, I was feeling pretty good about it, but you just you want that buffer in this part of the world. So parked it up, went in, talked to the visitor center, asked her about motels. She was like, well, the good news is there's only 3 in town to choose from, and definitely don't go to this one. She pointed out on the map. And then the other one was full, so that left the third one, which is a place called Buckshot Betty's. Fun name. I got a little cabin out the back. Yeah, nice enough spot. I really wish they put a fan in the cabin. It was really stuffy. There was like one window that opened, and that was kind of it for ventilation. So dropped my stuff, went into the restaurant, had a burger that was fine. pretty good fries. It was full when I pulled in, so I took like the last seat at the bar next to these like two Canadian dudes who were just like, older dudes. One guy was so vulgar, it was crazy. Like I don't mind a little cussing. Hell, I don't mind. But this guy, like every word was like fucking, and he was just like, he seemed to be, I don't know, a real grouch. So then some people left to me, or to the right of me left. I got up, got a glass of water, sat down, scooted over a little bit from the bar to give him and his buddy a little bit more room. Of course, instantly he clocked that and was like, "Oh, what's the problem? Like moving away from me, or I don't know, whatever." I was like, "All right, man." I just ate my burger, left him alone, left him to his devices, and then walked back over to the visitor center, sat in the car while it kind of finished ticking up to 100%. That took a really long time. The bugs were really bad, so couldn't really keep the door open. Just kind of a pain in the ass. But by the time I got back to the little cabin at Buckshot Betty's, it was cooling off, but still pretty toasty. So I took a cold shower, and then just kind of passed out. Actually slept pretty well in this little place. Okay, day 7, last day. Beaver Creek to Anchorage. Woke up early, Buckshot Betty's. Got coffee at a place across the street. It's fine. It's like motel, gas station, coffee. Then hit the road. The roads are still pretty bad and lumpy here, so still with those frost heaves and stuff. And there's also no real cell service for a huge chunk of this once you leave town. The border crossing was really quick, and then once you cross in the U.S. side, it's funny how instantly better the highway gets for a little bit. There's some construction work in the area. I guess that is the cause of the good roads. A couple places you had to wait for pilot cars, but it was overall pretty quick through here. Again, really beautiful, nice mountains, scenery, vistas, you get it. Got to Toke in mid-morning, stopped here for coffee and a snack. This is one of the places I've been keeping my eye on for the fire. There was a big fire here, kind of just south of town, that was kind of threatening the town and looked like it might close the cut down to Glen Allen. That would have detoured me quite a ways up through Delta Junction and then down the Richardson. So the other two legs of the triangle, basically. Not a ton longer, but not really time I wanted to spend. I was kind of ready to be home. Fortunately, there was a giant downpour here the day before that put the fire completely out. So another win. Continued on to Glen Allen. I pulled in around 11:30. There's no state or federal funding of chargers in this great nation of ours, the USA, at least not around here. So this charger is like another private company, yet another app I had to download. It was like tucked in the back parking lot of this like log cabin Subway right next to a dumpster. Build your own metaphor for something with those pieces. There was a little bit of panic here when the CCS charger at the station wouldn't start charging. But monkeying around with the app and the charger and the station for a little bit, finally got to work. Again, 50 kilowatts, not really fast, but left it for an hour. Walked up about a quarter mile up the highway to this place called the Caribou Motel or Caribou Hotel, maybe Caribou something. There's a cafe here. Grilled cheese was great. Tomato soup was fine, and the salad was kind of weird. So take that for what you will. And then charged up to about 85%. Could have gone further, but that should have been enough to get me to Anchorage. It was shorter, and I knew there were stops along the way in case there was a problem. But just rolled straight through to Anchorage. The section between Glen Allen and Palmer on this route is before you pull out into Palmer and the Matsu Valley and, all that entails. That section, the highway gets really narrow, but the scenery is really beautiful, incredible scenery. Some of the best of the trip, I would say. And finally saw a moose. Hadn't seen a moose this whole trip. Had seen some bear and some bison and stuff like that, but no moose yet, so it was nice to see one. Felt like good luck. And then got into Anchorage at about 17%, so plenty good enough. The trip highlights. Liard Hot Springs was number one with a bullet for sure. You got to go there. Just generally, the Canadian Rockies scenery was pretty amazing. The Twisted Cork, getting twisted at the Twisted Cork was a highlight for sure. Signpost Forest was amazing. Can't skip that. I really like just like Kamloops and Williams Lake. That little kind of area of BC was really cool. I don't know, the scenery and the vibes seemed good. I think that's like on the tail end of the Okanagan Valley and like wine country, so maybe something about that. I would like to go back there because it's A, it's close, and B, it seems like there's some cool stuff around there. And then Logjam Coffee
In Kamloops.
was great. That's it. I hope this helps someone. I hope this saves someone from reading text because that sounded like it was gonna be really tough for some of you guys. But yeah, in general, it seemed like Canada was really rolling out the EV stuff. I was amazed. BC basically, you didn't really have to worry about planning out a route. I think like everywhere you stopped, you could have found charging. Yukon obviously a little bit less, but it seemed like they were improving stuff up there too. So yeah, feels pretty doable these days in an EV if you have the kind of range that this one did. That's it. Thanks, guys.